What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I've got a martial arts topic today, and that is karate and why it's so overpowered in MMA. And why that's so, historically shocking, actually. Now, my viewers who are, maybe younger, maybe newer to the sport, maybe don't know the whole history of the sport, you might be hearing that and thinking that, well, what's so weird about this? I can think of karate fighters who are really good in the UFC. Karate seems to be a very legitimate striking art and base for MMA. What's so weird about that? Why would that be shocking to have come about? But if you know the history of the sport and you've been watching it longer, you'll know that there was a long stretch of time where karate was not considered a serious martial art. It was not considered a serious base for MMA. It was not considered to be anything close to comparable in effectiveness to things like boxing and kickboxing and Muay Thai. It was laughed at the way that we still laugh at things like Kung Fu or Silat or the other exotic traditional martial arts. And so I want to kind of discuss how that came to be and what changed it, because early on in the history of MMA, or at least in the UFC lineage of MMA as a sport, back when it was just style versus style in a no holds barred kind of fight, karate did very terribly. Now, striking in general didn't do great because grapplers overwhelmingly beat the strikers early on, with some exceptions, but overwhelmingly that is what happened. And within each camp, the submission grapplers would beat the non-submission grapplers, so jiu-jitsu would beat wrestling, and the full contact combat sports strikers would beat everyone else. So boxers and kickboxers and Muay Thai guys would beat karate guys, taekwondo guys, kung fu guys, etc. And that makes sense, because if all you know is that one art, and your one art is not only striking, but it's semi-contact striking, because most traditional martial arts that are striking systems, they don't do full contact. And there's an exception, but if you look at taekwondo, if you look at most sport karate, it is semi-contact and it's point fighting. So it's basically fencing, but without a sword. It's about getting in and tagging and landing your point, and not about an actual fight where you're damaging the other person, landing repeated blows, and hopefully knocking them out. People still get knocked out sometimes because, you move into a punch and it happens. Taekwondo has some of the gnarliest knockouts you'll ever see, because they are still allowed to kick the head. Their goal isn't typically to knock the guy out, because you just need to touch him with your foot and you score. But nevertheless, guys will throw spinning kicks, jumping tornado kicks, etc., and they will connect sometimes with full force and just blow the guy's head off. So that does still happen. But typically it's a tippy-tappy affair. And the major exception is Kyokushin karate, which is a full contact style of karate that's bare knuckle. Low kicks are allowed, knees are allowed. It's very gnarly. But its great limitation is that they don't strike the face, because it's bare knuckle. They only punch they don't punch the face. They only punch the body. They can kick and knee the face, but no punches to the head are allowed. And that's a big limitation. And for that reason, even though Kyokushin guys are badass and gnarly, if you take a pure Kyokushin guy and throw him in with a kickboxer or a Muay Thai guy, typically the Kyokushin guy will lose, because they're just so not used to boxing to the head. Now, guys with Kyokushin bases have gone on to do extremely well in MMA and kickboxing, guys like Bas Rutten, all sorts of kickboxers, but by itself, even Kyokushin is a little too limited. But anyways, in MMA, again, what you saw was that striking just got its ass kicked by grappling typically, and of the strikers who were successful, they were the guys from the full contact combat sports background. And karate, again, was largely thrown aside with shit like kung fu. And as that progressed, as strikers learned some grappling, learned how to sprawl, got some takedown defense, again, it was typically the combat sports full contact strikers that were successful. It was guys like Crow Cop, who came from K1, learned a bit of grappling, got really good takedown defense, and was very successful. That's the kind of shit that worked. It really wasn't until Machida that we had a serious, high-level, highly accomplished karate guy in MMA, or rather, a karate guy who was very high accomplished in MMA. There's a reason why Chael Sonnen made fun of it. Chael Sonnen is quoted as saying, back when he was a contender at middleweight, and at the time Lyoto Machida was champion at light heavyweight. He said middleweight is a way better division than light heavyweight because light heavyweight has a fucking karate guy for the champion. And that was like a kind of legitimate dig back in the day. And even Machida had a fight with Rampage Jackson, which Rampage won by split decision. First 2 rounds were close, but went to Rampage, and then round 3, Machida caught him and hurt him pretty bad. But they scored it, 2 rounds to 1 for Rampage. But in any case, leading up to that fight, Rampage's coach is like on the countdown video, and he's shitting on karate. He's like saying, "Look, like this will be an easy fight. Karate sucks. Like we've always known karate sucked. Like come on, be serious." And Machida had done enough at that time to show you should take him more seriously than that, and I'm sure Rampage's coaches actually did take him more seriously than that. But that was still like a kind of legitimate dig back then, because again, aside from Machida, we just didn't have like karate guys in MMA who were doing anything good. Now, we had guys who had done karate, of course, like I already mentioned Bas Rutten, but you had guys like Georges St-Pierre who sneakily was like using his karate base in MMA, because Pierre's distance management, his ability to close distance, seemed to come from his karate base, and that obviously served his shoot fighting, his sort of striking into takedowns very well. But as far as his actual striking, he can't strike like a karate guy, really. He fought like more like a typical MMA guy. I mean, his fucking striking game was mostly a jab and low kicks, that sounds more like a guard Musashi than it does like a karate guy. And speaking of Musashi, like, to speak to the effectiveness of Lyoto Machida, just watch their fight. Musashi, very good fighter, gets schooled on the feet for 5 rounds by Machida. Now, Machida is not the best representative of karate in MMA, but he's like kind of the guy who heralded it, because now we have plenty of guys to turn to. But there's 2 that really stick out as like true karate practitioners and who appear like OP as strikers in MMA. And by OP, I mean like no one's really solved them. And the 2 that I'm referring to are Michael Venom Page and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, because Machida was very effective. He became a world champion, and most of the people he fought genuinely struggled with his striking style. But he has been solved on occasion, on the feet, that is. And, Shogun is the guy I'm thinking of, because they had 2 fights. The first one, it went the distance. Machida was the champion, Shogun the challenger. Most people thought Shogun should have won the decision. It was a close fight, but most people thought Shogun should have won. It went to Machida. They had a rematch, and Machida was doing okay at first, but then nevertheless got knocked out in the first round. So Shogun kind of proved that he more or less had the answer on the feet to Machida. Now, with Wonderboy and with Venom Page, I don't think anyone's actually solved them on the feet. And I'm specifically talking on the feet, because guys have beaten all these dudes. But as far as a striking style, as far as striking in MMA, they're still kind of unsolved, and even though they've been finished, like Anthony Pettis knocked out Wonderboy, for Christ's sake, Lima knocked out Page, but those were weird circumstances. So like the Lima one, that's a very MMA sequence. If you haven't seen the fight, Page is doing Michael Page shit, but Lima lands a low kick, and it kind of like sweeps his leg out from under him, so Page like falls to his butt forward, and as he's standing back up, boom, Lima lands this uppercut and just flatlines him. But that's a very MMA sequence. You're on the ground, you're getting up, you're getting hit while you're getting up. That's not like someone solving your striking. That's just a very good sequence. And a very difficult to repeat sequence, frankly. And with like Pettis knocking out Wonderboy, that was mostly just luck. I mean, for being real. Or that was mostly rather a smaller, fast guy doing a trick that worked really well. To his credit, like he did it on purpose. He didn't just close his eyes and swing and connect or something. But he was getting, pretty comfortably schooled, and then he did like the Superman punch off the fence and clipped him. That's just, again, that's not like solving Wonderboy. That's not showing you actually know how to deal with his style. That's just showing that you're a fighter and you did a bit of a Hail Mary and it worked, okay? Now, again, like this, looking at this historically, this is very weird. It's very weird that the 2 most effective strikers in the history of the sport, arguably, are these fucking like goofy kind of point karate guys. I mean, I know Wonder Boy comes from not a purely point background, but more from like the long pants North American kickboxing background. But nevertheless, like, it's fucking weird. This is not the traditional MMA narrative, where there's the four bases of MMA, which are boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, And obviously, as the sport's evolved, we've seen more success from judo, from sambo, not just karate, but taekwondo. Like, it's becoming a more, comprehensive, like, list of options as far as bases for the sport. But nevertheless, like, even there, it's kind of fucking weird that guys like Thompson and Page remain the most challenging guys on the feet that we've ever seen. And I stand by that. And, people might argue in the comment section of like more effective strikers, but I think if we're, I think in most of those cases, like, they're being aided by a more comprehensive MMA game. But just if we're looking purely at success on the feet, again, I think Thompson and Page are as successful as anyone. And I honestly think, I'm of two minds about it, but I honestly think it's just a function of MMA striking still not quite being where it needs to be. Because in kickboxing, this doesn't really work. Because we've seen guys like this, like, try this out in like Glory and K1 style kickboxing, and they get success to a point, but the answer is known. So, like, the most notable example is probably when Joseph Valtellini, I think his name is. He has a YouTube channel. He was a Glory kickboxer. Very good fighter. Very good technique instructionals on his channel. But he had a match with Raymond Daniels, that's his name. Raymond Daniels, who, was this very stylistic, flashy, kind of point karate guy of the kind of Michael Venom Page mold. He had come to full contact kickboxing. He was having a lot of success, but Joseph was able to beat him. He was able to, game plan well and just come in, and it was mostly like how you'd think it would be. It was just high guard, march him down, cut the ring, you work low kicks and combinations and like kind of pin the guy down and work him over. Like, he needs space, he needs distance. His legs are there to kick if you cut the cage or cut the ring. Like, it's not that complicated actually in kind of traditional striking theory of how to beat these guys, And that's kind of what Shogun did to Machida. He just fought like he was doing Muay Thai, and he just came in high guard, just kind of came in low kicks. Like, it's as tricky and elusive and like borderline mystical seeming as that sort of karate can seem to be. The solution seems pretty straightforward. Again, you just come in high guard, don't overcommit to anything. Don't follow them, actually cut the fucking ring, like, chop the legs, like, once you're in range, like, work combinations and actual combinations, and combinations that mix up head, body, legs, like, just do kickboxing. I think karate is more successful, though. My counter argument to that is that the takedowns change things. So being able to maintain a very long distance is useful in a sport like MMA, where the takedown is a real fucking threat. And being able to decide when you're like really far away or very close is very useful if you want to take someone else down. That's, again, I mentioned George St. Pierre. That's how he incorporated it into his shoot fighting. Guys like Robert Whitaker do similar stuff. Like, this has these other benefits and applications to MMA and to the grappling side, ironically, that stuff like traditional kickboxing kind of doesn't, Now, people have made it work, of course, like Jose Aldo and Peter Yan are probably your best examples, where they fight like more traditional boxers and kickboxers, and their grappling is exceptional. Their takedown defense is exceptional. Their overall games are exceptional. They show that, like, some of the traditional arguments about like the weaknesses of kickboxing and Muay Thai aren't necessarily true, because those arguments are that, like, hey, if you just stand, in a high stance with a high guard, flat-footed, like right in front of someone, they're just going to double leg your ass over. And we've seen it's not necessarily that simple either. But anyways, that would be the counter argument in favor of karate is like, look, with the range, with the closing of distance and whatnot, that is so helpful for MMA. It makes defense easier for MMA because in MMA, you've got the small gloves, you've got so many things to defend, not just in terms of striking, but you also need to defend the takedowns. Like an easy solution is just to stand really far away or just to move away whenever someone gets close to you. And the octagon is big, it doesn't have corners. It's kind of purposely made so that strikers have more room to work than they would in like a boxing ring. So that sort of shit just works better than it might otherwise. Now, I think another sort of component, though, that might be a pretty big factor is simply that these examples are in the heavier weight classes. Okay, Lyoto Machida fought at middleweight and light heavyweight. Wonder Boy and MVP fight at welterweight, which is still a good division, but like, it might be a thing where it's like, yeah, you're just not going to see a lot of this at like lightweight, bantamweight, featherweight. It's like, not that we don't see any of it. Like Kyoji Haraguchi is a largely karate guy. Now his grappling has come along leaps and bounds, and he's more of a karate boxer in like a Robert Whittaker mold than he is just like a karate guy in like a more like MVP mold or Machida mold. But so it's not like karate just doesn't have success down there, but like you imagine someone like MVP fighting at bantamweight and you wonder, like, would this just not work so well? Would someone like Peter Yan or Jose Aldo just solve him? I think they might. So ultimately, that's kind of my takeaway is that I feel like there's room for just people to bring some more good, like, traditional kickboxing into MMA. And I think there's some reasons that we don't see more of that. And people, Muay Thai fans have often wondered, like, why don't we see elite Muay Thai in MMA? And people say, well, it's because Muay Thai is, sort of a localized thing. It's like most of the top Muay Thai guys are just from Thailand. It is their national sport. So they go into that sport. They don't come over to MMA. And again, people have argued the arguments I made earlier about like why kickboxing is actually not as ideal for MMA. And, and the reality is that just, they all have weaknesses. Boxing has its weaknesses, kickboxing and Muay Thai have their weaknesses, karate and Taekwondo have their weaknesses. How you stand, what strikes you use, how you defend, how you use your footwork, your head movement, et cetera, they all have weaknesses. I do, though, lean towards kickboxing. I think there's the limitations of kickboxing are a little overstated, and I think there's just a reason kickboxing evolves the way it does, where when you allow people to punch, kick, knee, elbow, kick the head, etc., they tend to gravitate towards like relying less on head movement and footwork, having more kind of high guard systems, and working the legs and working combinations. And the footwork is more limited. Because the more you rely on footwork, the more vulnerable you are to the low kicks. Again, the head movement more limited because you're vulnerable to kicks and knees. And, maybe that means you get deficient enough at your ring cutting that when you fight someone like MVP, you're like confused and aren't good enough at cutting the cage. But as long as you maintain that ability, which there are plenty of good kickboxers who can and do, just like my example of Joseph Valtellini, like if you can do that, you can beat guys like MVP. And I think that's probably a better approach to something like MMA than doing what guys like MVP have done. Sorry about that. Goddamn neighbor's dog started barking really loud and it was distracting me and got loud enough that I knew it would be on the recording. So doing a second take here. But yeah, just to wrap up everything and summarize, a bit of a history lesson video and a bit of a style and technique breakdown video for those who are interested. But in summary, karate, for some huge stretch of like the initial part of the timeline of MMA, was not effective. It was not taken seriously. It was like universally mocked. It gradually got taken more seriously, largely with the advent of Lyoto Machida, but then with other guys after. The most effective guys, I would argue, have been Thompson and Page, and they still really haven't been solved by anyone. I think karate will probably always have some value in MMA because of its distance management and because of its ability to connect to takedowns, to just keep the distance far, and then when the person comes in, boom, shoot on them. Like karate's connection to that, like not only the skill in which not only the skill it builds inside you to be able to manage that distance, but also it being a striking art. Like you're not, you're able to do that from a striking stance or striking posture from strikes themselves. Like it's teaching you how to do that in a way that being a wrestler who's used to shooting out of a lower stance and doesn't know how to strike and has to figure out how to go from your awkward boxing to your shot, like in many ways, like having the karate background is just better for that, and George St. Pierre, again, like perfect example. So that's like the plus for karate, but nevertheless, I think something like more traditional kickboxing is ultimately where MMA is going to steer. I think the reasons kickboxing like doesn't become like karate, or rather the reason karate is so ineffective in kickboxing typically, I think those reasons still apply in MMA and can be used to beat these styles. And I think that is basically how Shogun beat Machida. And I think the weaknesses of kickboxing are a little overstated these days. So I kind of suspect the sport will move in that direction. But again, the distance management and that connection to shoot fighting, to takedowns, that will probably mean that karate is still nevertheless like here to stay. It will be a permanent fixture. Like it will be a base and an approach that like never like gets totally made obsolete. But I think the time will come where guys like Page and Thompson just don't, it doesn't work that well. Like they are going to be solvable. The time will come where we will have other strikers that we can point to as the guys that no one could solve, and they won't be karate guys. And I wonder how much of that is simply a function of the fact that guys like Thompson and Page and Machida fought from welterweight and up. So that's all I got on that.